All right, everyone. So, welcome to another Hot Takes from DIF. We're talking about some VC and DID adoption mechanics today, talking about how we get from markets to standards, basically, how we can get the good stuff in people's hands and get the decision makers to see the vision. I have with us today Harmen van der Kooij that I met at the MOSIP festival, the MOSIP annual conference, where I also met Vishwa, who's here from MOSIP itself. We can talk about anything you guys want. We can talk about FIDES, which the FIDES consortium which Harmen runs and founded. We can talk about MOSIP. We can talk about Interop and economies of scale in any order you guys want to talk about them. So where should we start? Why don't each of you guys introduce yourself a little, maybe starting with Harmen, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Well, thanks, guys, and nice to have this discussion. Yeah, so I'm Harmen from FIDES Labs. Actually, FIDES Labs is an organization that, on the one hand, facilitates all kinds of, I would say, innovation and interoperability projects that actually use verifiable credentials and also very much decentralized identifiers. We've been doing that for quite a while. We try to be very neutral on that, work with different technology implementers, and try to do that also more on a kind of a global scale. So that's also why we, for instance, quite heavily team up with MOSIP. And in parallel, we try to, actually we started the FIDES community platform, which actually is meant to show the overview and insight in what actually is used and existing in the world of wallets and credentials. And we try to be, again, a kind of neutral there. So just really showing like which ones do support DIDs, and if so, which DID methods, also for what use cases and that kind of stuff. And then I think as part of that, we also, I think 3 years ago, initiated something which we called the Decentralized Identity Interop Profile, which was kind of a way to break the fragmentation of everything in the world of DIDs and VCs. And we try to bring together tech providers that actually were willing to agree on one base profile. And that's maybe one of the topics we could talk about, whether or not that's interesting.
I'm a huge fan of profiles. I'm working on a grant now in a totally different use case to establish some profiles. So you better believe the questions are going to go in that direction. But Vishwa, why don't you talk about how you got involved with MOSIP and what role you see MOSIP having for this adoption curve?
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Vishwa. I'm a principal architect at MOSIP. Basically, me and my team take care of all the designs and tech choices, standards that needs to be implemented in MOSIP. I believe most of us know what MOSIP is. MOSIP is basically an open source foundational identity platform that is currently used by 28 plus countries for their national identity system. As part of this MOSIP journey for past 5 years, we started with a foundational ID platform, but we were also coming across a lot of requirements for handling offline, no internet kind of areas, and how do you avail verification, right? So that is where we were looking at verifiable credentials and more exploring into the verifiable credentials area. We found that building any kind of tooling or solution around the verifiable credentials is not only for identity. So that was created as a separate DPG called NG. So currently MOSIP has a foundational identity layer. Also NG as a credential solution is also offered. So that is, I believe that is where the interoperability profile story will fit into. So I'm also interested in understanding what kind of interoperability toolings that are available. We have worked with Harmen. A lot of interoperability. We connect through Harmen to other tech providers around the wallet space to check the interoperability. The other interoperability profile is also a very nice idea. We have tried this before, but I'd like to understand more.
Okay. Cool. So, so I think Harmen was very humble when presenting the FIDES work and the DIF work as just a little thing he's put out there. It's a lot of work, and the outputs have been really influential and really useful. As Vishwa says, he can just point clients to it, and clients can sort of I shouldn't say clients, implementers can just see for themselves what actually works, what marketing is exaggerated, which economies of scale are unlocked by these choices. And yeah, one of the conversations we have here when we're thinking about portable data, verifiable credentials in general that may be verifiable and may be portable. You want to have the greatest possible acceptance of those credentials. You want to issue whatever credentials are accepted in the most places. So that's a big part of this profiling work is figuring out which use cases to use, which kinds of credentials, who else is using what credentials where. So how do you guys see the current landscape of OIDC for VC, linked data, verifiable credentials, which we usually call VCDM, verifiable credential data model, which is kind of funny because the whole point of a data model is that it isn't one format, but then we end up using the base format. So how do you guys see that sort of fragmentation or translation work?
Yeah, maybe, I don't know, Vishwa, if you want to go first, but I think one of the things that come to mind when you're asking this one is, I think if you look at Europe and the EU wallet, there's a lot of focus on OpenID for VC, right? VCI and VP. Yeah. And I think the good news is that at least it's a clear spec, right? So that's good. But at the same time, it's very, very much focused on the kind of login use case, right? Everyone, especially also in OpenID world, comes, of course, from IAM use cases. So, and I think also because of the political complexity in the different countries, it's a real task in its own already to have this EU wallet. So everyone tries to limit the scope now, which I kind of understand. But because of that, there's almost only the focus on the PID, the personal identification document. Whereas I think we all agree that the whole concept of verifiable credentials is way more, right? It's so much more than just that. And I think because of that, there's also not a lot of interest at all at the moment or focus on linked data in the EU wallet discussion. And I think, but at the same time, it's super crucial that also this VCDM as well as the DID spec is actually also kind of growing in adoption. But at the moment in Europe, everyone is looking at what the government is now demanding, let's put it that way. And I think because of that happening, we kind of agreed that, for instance, a profile like DEEP is even more important, because what we think is that we like the idea of OpenID for VC as being a credential agnostic transport mechanism. But I think in reality at the moment it's just ST-JOT, VC, and now mDOC also adding up. But at least in the EU wallet discussion, there's no VCDM. And there's also no DID. And I think there's a lot of use cases happening, which are also important for Europe, which do rely more on linked data and that kind of stuff. So that's why we think it just makes a lot of sense to try to team up with those parties or government bodies, it doesn't matter, anywhere in the world, that actually do believe that the concept of, let's say, signed linked data makes sense. And also the DID makes sense. But yeah, teaming up is so crucial there, because I think maybe one of the reasons why Europe didn't choose for it is just because the specifications were not completely clear yet, or there was still too much discussion. 250 DID methods, a VCDM 2.0 with a lot of options, right? And I think with an Interop profile, you have to choose, right? So out of the 60 options in VCDM, you choose that those 10 options are mandatory and the others may not be, right? And out of the 250 DID methods, we choose one or two. And I think that's needed if you want to go for Interop. And of course, you can still have debates then about if those are the right choices. But if you don't make those choices, there's no Interop and there's no adoption. And that's kind of what we're seeing. And that's also why we think it's so important. And we care a lot about, for instance, the DID spec and also VCDM. Although I always say it's not too much about particulars, but we really think those specs make sense and there's years of effort in it. So that's why we feel that let's try to find a bit of common ground on this and have as many implementers work on a common ground. They can still have their own specifics. So you can still, if you have, for instance, MOSIP, yeah, they implement DID web. They could still implement 4 other DID methods to support more use cases. But if you agree on this base spec, then yeah, there's a lot of things possible. And I think that's happening actually, because I think at the moment in this deep community, I think there's about 10, 20 implementers from all kinds of different countries. Yeah, they actually just started implementing all this for quite a while. And I think to really make DIDs and VCDM really more adopted, we need way more power, right? And it's also why I think some organization like MOSIP is really, and NG are really influential, right? Because they're implementing in so many countries, and there's almost so much experience also in India now, also coming up with VCs that, yeah, I think I think we need to team up somehow, right? And I think small and large organizations, and I consider MOSIP also as one of those larger and influential teams.
You're right, Harmen. So it's, if you look at it, it's basically the flexibility versus how much effort we are willing to put in, right? So from a specification perspective, there's so much of flexibility because when the specification is thought through, it has to handle a wide variety of use cases, right? But when it comes to the implementation, there are 1 or 2 use cases is what predominantly we look at. Like I said, we started with identity, right? How do you issue a foundational identity as a verifiable credential? That's where we started. But now we also work with multiple countries for other use cases. Let's take Brazil, for example. Brazil, we had an interesting use case to issue the land registry as a VC. So you have a land registered to you, you can issue that as a VC. And this information can be given by the farmer to a bank to avail a rural credit loan. So this happened a couple of weeks back. So it actually went to production, and the first credit transaction was issued last week or last week in Brazil. So
Great.
there are other use cases opening up, right? And as you rightly said, this is also the play of political game, right? Preferences on the specification also goes that way. For example, when we started, we were supporting only JSON LD, right? Only JSON LD, and we were using DID web for the issuer, and DID key and DID JWK for the holder bindings. So this is where NG stack for the credentialing started. But I believe even Brazil, and there is one more country, TNT, which also recently went production for verification of skill certificates. So I believe these 2 things still use JSON LD because we started there, right? But when we started talking to various countries, specifically in the African region, so there is also the thought process of other credential formats, which is a little more closely associated to PKI, which people are very familiar with, right? So the other credential formats was a specific ask from a country, and then we started implementing into the platform. So there is a political angle to it also, but largely the work what we do in MOSIP is to see how we can enable the digitization in a country. So whatever works better for them is something we try to implement. But as you said, interoperability profile is very important to make sure that there's not like too many options. And from an open source perspective, managing and maintaining this too many options is also a big pain. So we would also like to have smaller set and do a very good implementation for the smaller set and work within the smaller set. That would be really nice.
Yeah,
so we agree, Vishwa, we need a discussion.
Yes.
But maybe
yes,
one question I would want to ask you, Vishwa, because we had a couple of emails going back and forth in the last couple of days. And I think one of the things that I was really interested also to discuss is that I feel that the adoption of DIDs, but I think also for the VCDM spec, I think is lagging behind, right? I think if you look at SD.VC, mDOC, but I would also say the other type of identifiers, the more, I would say, classical X509 ones. And it makes a lot of sense, right? So, but I think there's so much powerful functionality in the concept of DIDs with servers, endpoints, and well, all kinds of, I think, interesting ingredients. But at least I think in Europe, but I guess all over the world, there's so few people that really see the value or are aware of the concepts. But for instance, in Europe, it really fits nicely with the discussion about digital autonomy, etc. So we're quite eager to make sure that it's not going to be completely overflooded by, let's say, only OpenID for VC type of things without DIDs and SDJOLs. Because it would be a pity because we see so many opportunities where those technologies alone will not be sufficient. And that's why I was thinking also of the DIF community. I think all the people that are part of the DIF community, I think, bother about probably DIDs, right? Because I think it's more or less the core of what DIF is about. And I was really interesting. Like, I mean, there's not really any other Interop profiles, right? Because to be honest, we don't really care if it's deep or if it's another profile. I think we were just missing a profile. And for instance, also with Sankashan, we're discussing things on UN, TP and UN level, right? Where I also feel that we have to have some real specific profiles somehow, right? And again, it doesn't really matter which ones. Maybe you could have 2 or 3 profiles even. But I think at the moment, there's not really I mean, in the land of blinds, I think deep at the moment is the most adopted Interop profile with DIDs and VCs. And well, although that sounds nice, I think it's way too small, right? I think, and that's why I was really wondering, like, shouldn't it be important for the DIF community and maybe also for MOSIP that we really team up on this, right? Otherwise, DIDs may not exist even anymore in a couple of years, right? Just because there's other forces that are stronger.
There are some other profiles, but they're happening sort of in parallel in other verticals that we don't see, right? So the digital passport you could think of as a kind of verifiable claim profile, more on the VC side. DCC, which is an international educational credential consortium, has been pushing very hard for linked data VCs and not profile in the same sense of facilitating more wallets. They're lagging behind on the wallet side, but at least on the credential verification consumption side, they've been trying to document and promote a very particular algorithm for ingesting educational credentials. And those have to be linked data. Those have always been linked data, will always be linked data, because it's a distributed graph, no matter how you do it. There's no global accreditation body. You have to let every country have its own weird format and, fix it up in compaction. So like at least VCDM is safe in the educational world because there's less money to be made and irresolvable political diversity of credentials. It's sort of the opposite of the IAM use cases, which are kind of globalized by clouds and IAM empires. But yeah, we do. I didn't mean to contradict your main point that we need further profiles and coordination to harmonize the market to get everyone into an economy of scale as quickly as possible. Just to say there are no other profiles. You just have to squint at some things to see them as profiles.
No, I agree. By the way, I mean, and we're trying to really monitor closely, like which profiles exist but
yeah. I mean, I think one of the things is that, DIF has always had a very specific position in the market in terms of being a place where people can move specifications pretty quickly, where there's openness to different methodologies and being not, we have been non-opinionated about the stack. So if we want to say, okay, we are working right now on recommended DID methods so that our DID methodology, we recognize that this is a problem. And so our DID working group is working on recommending certain DID methods and moving that through. But I see that actually, of course, we want to promote and we want to make sure this works and we understand the problem. Like you can't come and say, hey, we're a standards body with 100 different competing standards. Yay. Like, that doesn't work. So what I think the right place for that work is probably W3C, where they're going to be moving that forward rather than DIF, because I think it would just be too much of a stretch for us to change our way of operating. And, our membership would just freak out, basically. We're a member-driven organization. We're sort of a proto-standards body. And at the same time, of course, we want to be there to push the methodologies that are working for the biggest implementations. And we definitely want to hold hands and, work with everybody. But it doesn't feel like something DIF could actually do to say, this is the one and only DID method.
Maybe by the way, because I completely agree, and I'm not sure if you were aware, and I think I discussed it also with Juan, but we actually are after 3 years, we kind of decided that if we want to bring this to another level, we have to move it to a different space, and we agreed to move to the Open Wallet Foundation. And while discussing that, we were looking like, okay, or should it be DIF, right, or should it be W3C? And in the end, we felt OWF still would be the most logical one because the profile actually uses different specifications, right? So it uses specifications from W3C, it uses it actually from DIF, it uses it from from OpenID Foundation, we felt it needed to be something neutral. And at the same time, I think also we very much try to avoid saying a message like, this is the DID method, for instance, right? I mean, like I said, I don't even really care which profile it is. I think the only problem is if you don't have a broadly adopted profile, then we have a fantastic, let's say, DID specification, generic DID specification, but it's not really used because of the fragmentation. I think that's the worry we kind of had, and we're also trying to
A lot of DID methods have a cold start problem. They're great as soon as people start using them, other people will use them.
I mean, I think the other problem, which is sort of intrinsic, is that you can't really go into highly political processes with a very detailed, nuanced perspective, right? Like getting something into the architecture requirements document requires saying this is how to go. And corporations are much better at doing that than organizations like us. Yeah, with no options, right? It has to have no options. No, this is the way to do it. And again, as a standards body, we have to compromise. And so we have, we operate with a very highly nuanced perspective, but you have to be, a little bit more single-minded if you want to get something through IDIS and actually into a specification. And that just hasn't been our strength so far. But I think that it's certainly possible to bring together a coalition of people, and we'd be interested in that, where we are pushing for one specification in a process that isn't within DIF, but is part of a coalition saying, okay, this is for the IDIS wallet or for the business wallet. This is what we are recommending with this coalition of people. That might be more realistic than expecting one organization to say, okay, we're going to do that. Yeah,
But
we definitely.
and maybe that's exactly what we're talking about, because I think it's not either one of us or either organization, or it has to be some kind of collaborative work with the coalition of the willing, right? Like the implementers only implement if they want it. And for instance, we have a lot of competitive implementers doing it because they say, so there's all these wallet providers, they're looking for their business model, right? There's no business model yet if there's no real adoption. So I think each of those parties that currently participate are kind of agreeing that yes, they may be competitors, but they are kind of teammates on creating a new market, right? Of verifiable data, etc. And I think MOSIP is, of course, also one of those tech providers. It's maybe slightly different because it's, of course, non-profit and completely open source. But at the same time, I think, yeah, you have to choose, right, Vishwa, what your effort is spent on, right? And
exactly.
I think that's why it's so crucial that, for instance, yeah, I think it's all in the end. I mean, we organize every month this meetup to discuss the implementations and the specs, but and actually I've been facilitating that for I think 3.5 years now. But what we are saying is actually I only want to do it if there's implementers, right? I mean, why would we do that if there's no implementers? And I think the same thing also what we've been discussing for MOSIP a couple of times. I think we've been talking about the idea, right, Vishwa? But I think so far it's been close, right? So it's also a matter of timing, right? Use case.
Yes, yes. Yeah. The use case was the problem because there was an instance of using W3C API, which we didn't have an use case to implement, right? But the profile was needing it. But now with the product passport coming in, where we are seeing a use case. So you're right. Even though we are a not for profit organization, it is really based on the demand, right? Are the people looking for it? Can it actually enable the digital journey in a country? Can we enable people? So that's how we make decisions. And when we are seeing a use case, and if a country is really interested, so that's where we spend our efforts. Harmen, you're right. As an open source, maintenance effort is huge. So we would also like to have 2-3 options, not like 20-30. It's going to be very tough maintaining that code, making sure it's backward compatible. Old wallets are supported. Even with the current set of few countries implementations, it is becoming very tough for us to maintain the compatibility, right? So we started in a time where OpenID for VCI, OpenID for VP, it can be the 2.0, VCDM 2.0. A lot of these things were draft versions, right? Now from the standards side, it's always told it's a draft version, right? But we were always being asked or queried by countries asking something like this they want to implement. So we want to enable them. We started working with drafts and we were enabling the countries. But now when we want to do the backward compatibility, it becomes a huge pain, right? So from the maintenance effort, we would like to keep it to a very small number of paths that we want to support.
1.0 version now, right?
Sorry?
1.0 versions, right? That was quite good news, right? For a couple of those specs.
Yes. So we are currently working on moving it to 1.0. There is an aggressive effort going on there, but we are still with draft, the countries that's been running with some draft versions, but we'll allow them to very gradually move to the 1.0. and start support from there.
What do you guys think? Because I always felt there's a bit of a religious wars between, for instance, OpenID world and decentralized worlds, where I really felt that the protocol OpenID for VC was actually a nice bridge, right? I really felt like it was it could potentially be a nice bridge where, for instance, W3C VCDM type of credentials would travel over OpenID for VCI and VP. Although it may not be the perfect route, I agree that there could be other routes. But do you guys agree on that this could be an interesting bridge, or do you really feel that there's such characteristics that are not kind of matching enough?
Harmen, I would say that it's really an interesting bridge, and it came out naturally for us. So there are a lot of places in MOSIP, in internal modules, when we want to transfer data, we were already using JSON-LD for quite some time, right? And this is on the MOSIP identity platform. So as I previously said, we have actually 3 product lines in MOSIP. One is the foundational ID, which is where we started. We have ING as a credential stack. And the third one is called eSignet, which is for authentications, which is basically an application to enable any kind of digital system for an OpenID connect. You can think similar to key clock lines, but it is more like a thin layer on top of any national ID system to enable verification. Okay, so we were working on the OpenID specification and we were very comfortable there. We were using JSON-LD also in one end. So when OpenID VCA came, it was a no-brainer for us. So it was connecting all the solutions we already had within the platform together. So we were not looking much outside, and it was also gaining quite a good amount of popularity. And countries were not against it. So it was easier for us to build a solution and enable the country. So to answer your question, it was a very nice bridge, which naturally worked out for us.
I think the only challenge we now have, for instance, is that if you look at the OpenID for VCI and VP specs, there's clear mentions of the VC formats mDOC and SD-JOT-VC, which makes sense and is good, right? Because they're needed at least now, for instance, in Europe. But at the moment, for instance, the VCDM one is actually there's one format, although we have 2 VCDM versions, right? I think there's quite a difference between 1.1 and 2.0. And I think in these kind of scenarios, you have to be specific, right? This is one of those examples again, where I think we really need 2 VC format identifiers in OpenID for VCI and VP. And then that's one of those things in a interop profile community, is that if we start team up more in the upcoming months or year, I think those are type of details that have to be kind of worked. And we actually also trying to involve OpenID Foundation in this whole discussion, right? Because they kind of govern the OpenID for VCI aspect and VP.
I think those sorts the OIDF isn't that hostile if people come to meetings and say, hey, in my use case, I have some users with 1.1 and some with 2, and I'd rather the VP told me which was which. Like getting a PR into those specs isn't that hard while the spec is open. And I've known, DIF members have gone, DIF members that are members there too have gone. I've attended meetings to see how it works. It's a little more formal because the really attentive members of every working group have their whole company's revenue on the line, right? So it's like the problem with OIDF is that there's people with a lot of skin in the game are at every meeting, but I don't think they're necessarily against doing it. From what I've heard,
I agree.
The timeline just sort of snuck up on them. They had to finish. They like every PR every open issue that didn't have someone advocating and going to every meeting to advocate kind of got punted to a future version. So probably with the, like you say, being able to differentiate the two different VCDMs in like the tooling and the protocol, probably just fell through the cracks. I've heard of a lot of little bugs like that didn't make 1.0 because no one was advocating that month.
I think that's exactly maybe one of the reasons why I think maybe if, the DID and VCDM community should try to team up a bit more and then kind of join forces and just make a clear statement towards, in this case, the OpenID for VCI and VP spec groups. Because I think, like you say, I mean, they're fine with it, I think, right? That they just don't have the time to do it themselves, also because they're have different focus. So it's really a matter of just suggesting it, and we also have quite close lines to them, and I think that it should not be any real issue. I also want to ask you, Sankarshan, maybe about, because I felt that this whole discussion about the adoption, the global adoption of decentralized identifiers, as well as the VCDM data model, is super crucial also for instance, UNTP and UN Grid and UN VTD to become really successful. And because of that, I feel that it's also quite crucial to somehow have some opinionated profiles to make sure that there's sufficient mature tools that would support, for instance, also the UN TP and DIA kind of credentials. Would you agree that there's also really kind of a interest for that community to really kind of collaborate on clearer profiles? Because I feel that the current UNTP profile is super good. I'm really a fan, but it's not really detailed enough for technical interop.
I think as a principle, yes, the grid project at UNTP would eventually gravitate towards having profiles. The challenge or the main step towards getting better spec'd out profiles is having somebody with enough knowledge in that domain to be able to create the profile that says, here is the approach. Because, I mean, if we kind of look at where the grid project is, we have the basic skeleton of what the grid should behave like. We haven't even reached a stage where we'll put down technical specification and say, this is the first draft based on which we have to now figure out how to factor in various other implementation or adoption paths, and then see if the tech spec is robust enough and flexible enough to be able to handle all of that. But I know that you have reminded us earlier as well of the need to have profiles, and my own opinion on this is that we need to have profiles or requirements driven by experts in the domain, and for probably a very generic set of profiles will be the seed profiles, and then more specific ones will sort of come up. But I agree with you. I think the challenge now for many of the DID or decentralized identifier related deployments, I don't think the challenge is trying to demonstrate that this technology and technical architecture works at scale. MOSIP and others have amply demonstrated it. I think the challenge now is finding good business cases that can immediately translate into value, and being able to show that value is what driving both innovation and adoption. And that this is the change that I've seen in the past 2-3 years. I've been tracking some of these deployments, right? That there is more focus on really qualified business cases. Could be national cases, could be driven by commercial consortiums. But that is what is driving a lot of the adoption. And also at some points in time, leading to some of the conflicts and contentious conversations around formats and specs and other stuff.
Yeah, I think I also agree on that. And maybe Sankashan, interesting for you to be aware, I'm not sure if you were, but MOSIP with Vishwa and actually quite a large team together with a couple of European companies and businesses. We're also now working on a business case on the cotton supply chain, where UNTP is actually the basis, but where MOSIP is also looking together also with some of the students to actually implement the UNTP protocol by using the MOSIP tooling. Correct, Vishwa?
Yeah, Harmen. So that discussion is very actively going on. So that is where I said that's a very new kind of use case what we have seen so far. So far we have seen identity, because we come from that background. Identity is like anybody implementing MOSIP, then identity credential comes naturally. We have done educational institutions. As I said, there is a credit and a farmer registry, land registry. Those use cases, something we have seen. But this product passport, the UN protocol for digital product passport is a very new kind of use cases we are seeing, and we are trying to see how we can accommodate the solution that we have built for that particular use case, obviously with the help of the students. Yeah, so that is opening up new avenues for the NG project. It's been interesting. So that's where I also meant maybe W3C VC API, which it's a good specification, but we didn't have a use case. Now I'm seeing that specification will fit very nicely for this digital product passport use case. Harmen.
You know the funny thing, because I think Juan, you asked in the beginning, like, how do you see this whole thing happening, etc. But the strange thing is, there's a lot of attention now in Europe about this EU wallet, but at the same time, there's also stuff happening about digital product passports or data spaces or data sharing or digital autonomy. But somehow these worlds don't automatically connect. So there's billions of money going also to these digital product passports and well, all kinds of new laws about product or supply chain transparency or all age verification, all kinds of things. And many of those discussions are not connected yet with the topic of the wallet or verifiable credentials. But the funny thing is that especially a lot of those topics, like digital product passports, verifiable trade documents, etc., also preventing fraud in taxation, etc., they're not yet connected with, people don't connect it yet with the world of verifiable credentials and wallets. But especially those use cases require the VCDM and the linked data capabilities. And because of those worlds not being awake yet, there's not a real clear voice in the EU wallet discussion from those areas. So I was a bit surprised that, for instance, Gaia X, Catena X, they're large consortiums with the automotive industry in France and Germany that totally rely on linked data and even have verifiable credentials in their architecture. So I think they should complain, I would say at the moment, to the European policymakers that their requirements are not sufficiently addressed, I would say. But well,
I think the issue there, I think the way that happened is that they're sort of happening in different verticals, right? Like people don't wake up in the morning and decide they want to build a silo. Silos get built by, I don't know, over specialization and people not talking enough to their neighbors. I think the IDSP, like the International Data Spaces Project, was entirely based on distributed data and graph queries and getting data from everywhere for industrial purposes, open data. But it didn't have a strong authentication component. It wasn't about key management and knowing exactly who was doing what. It's more like pooling data and sort of like server identity or organizational identity was enough for a lot of the original use cases for IDSP. So, like you said, this whole emphasis on SDJOTs and the JOT economy of scale comes out of a totally different like set of authentication problems rather than open data problems. So I think like I agree, it is kind of a bummer the way Gaia X and Patina X didn't provide a tailwind for any of this open data or collaborative stuff that would have been really helpful to pool costs of promoting linked data tooling that everyone would share. But I think to some degree it was sort of a matter of which industries were driving, which industries were driving the Gaia X participation. Definitely the sovereignty issues are, yeah. I would love it if everyone who used the word sovereignty on the floor of Parliament got their Google account canceled and had to start using sovereign tooling in their day-to-day lives, right? But yeah, that's a hard gap to connect, to a hard gap to remediate, I think. But in some ways, like the UN, what's it called, CEFAC, UNTP stuff, does sort of force the issue because that needs to be a very distributed data. That's going to be data spanning continents that gets queried asynchronously, unexpectedly. Like that can only be highly distributed, if not completely decentralized, for it to work. So hopefully, if that use case gains a lot of steam, that'll have knock-on effects for everywhere else. Linked data sort of needs a little support, needs a little backup.
Yeah.
I think at the VC working group at W3C, the UNTP stuff is really front and center. Most of the companies participating there are participating specifically for that use case. And as Sankarshan said, it's such a big use case. The opposite of the SDJOT fixed credential foundational identity authentication use cases. It's the exact opposite. It's like educational credentials. Everything is chaos. So they have such a bigger problem to wrap their arms around. They can't possibly be moving at the same speed as the the log into your bank app that already knows everything about you problem. Open world problems all the way down for UNTP.
But I like the idea of having the kind of this mix, right? So because I honestly believe a bit of it both, right? I think everyone in the world needs to make a living for their family, etc. Right? That's normal, right? And at the same time, I think the concept of openness and transparency for certain cases are important, but that doesn't need to be black and white or doesn't need to be really kind of opposite of each other. And I think that's why I think similar like this I think Vishwa, that's also what you encounter, right? It's not one format or the other. Some use cases require A, other one B, right? I think that's what people start to realize now. Same thing counts, I think, also for semantics, etc.
But is there any real implementation of the BBS plus with JSON-LD, which actually solves a lot of selective disclosure problems? That would be a real boost.
I would like to show it in let's say the FIDES Ecosystem Explorer, right? So we have those kind of mappings, and at the moment we don't have that example. So I think if one of you would know it, we would literally really would like to kind of make it work, because I think a lot of people that are in the space would kind of consider that exactly what you say as the strategic or logical direction.
I don't know.
But maybe it's just a matter of time, right? Yeah.
The tricky part with cryptography is that like people are necessarily very, very conservative about new crypto, and BBS Plus is like a whole new branch of the family tree. Like taxonomically, it doesn't share many primitives with the stuff we use every day in prod. So like there are a lot of uses in crypto of other branches of the BBS tree that have been running for years and haven't been hacked. And so like there's reason to be optimistic, but I do think that with crypto, it won't be like a NIST approved curve for a long time because it isn't V1 yet at an SDO. So it's kind of like, there's tons of implementation history in academic and prototype environments. It's just not in prod yet. There are a lot of major companies pushing for it, but these things are hard to predict the timeline, because something could be 99% done, and then someone finds like some academic finds an attack, and then it's like, oh no, we need another year. That's my big concern with BBS Plus. But I know at W3C there have been a lot of companies talking about it for a long time. Some of them in Japan. I think a lot of Japanese companies have invested heavily in it for some reason. Partly because they want to use linked data VCs. They have linked data VCs in a lot of like government-backed use cases. The originator profile is VCDM. So they would really like to be able to do selective disclosure and not just be doing clear text use cases for one of their big national pushes. But definitely CC me when you hear of something going to prod with BBS Plus, because I should know off the top of my head which things are almost here.
Yeah, from a privacy angle, we have been always fascinated about BBS Plus, but as for the same reasons, it's not widely understood and accommodated. So we never got to prioritize implementation of BBS Plus. So that's why I was also curious. It solves a lot of privacy concerns. Even today, all the credential formats, you can still profile people, right? You can still link these credentials are same, even though there is a selective disclosure. So that's one of my areas where I
selective disclosure without unlinkability. Yeah. That's what we really want is selective disclosure without unlinkability or with unlinkability.
Yes. We don't know what exact direction the EU wallet's going, right? Because there could be certain, I don't know, directions or forces that certainly are going to complain too much about this topic, right? So it's not yet there, right? So I think everyone realizes, or more and more people are realizing what you are talking about, right? And now they have this short-lived concept for the credentials.
Short-lived credentials, yeah.
But yeah. But this is, I think, this is one of the reasons why we also feel that the whole topic, what we've been working on for so many years altogether, is just such a niche, right? We always feel it's not really it is maybe rocket science, but for some of the people working on this. But I think in general, it's not that complex. And I think we really want to make sure that average C-level people, average policymakers are starting to understand what it does, but also start to understand the big gaps. And maybe one of the gaps, Vishwa, is this topic, right? Like, hey, if Europe really is serious about their autonomy, just like India is serious about their autonomy and other countries, right? I think then, of course, if you really are aware of the missing piece, and we're getting closer and closer with the whole puzzle. And I think that's what I mean also with collaborating, right? Just like trying to collaborate on those topics that we agree on. Yeah, there's maybe some topics we don't 100% agree on, but I think there's so much we do agree on. Take that forward, have clarity on what's not agreed on yet or what's not ready, like the unlinkability discussion.
Yeah, I think we just need more profiles to operationalize this. My friend always says when I'm always talking about these, these specs and these things are being designed and these cutting edge things, and I have a friend who always says, do you have a single URL I could email to a new hire in the engineering department and say, implement everything in this list and we're done? And I'm like, no, actually, you have to figure out this, and there's some optionality. He's like, nope, not ready yet. I just need one URL. If you can't send me one URL, I'm not going to implement it. So,
or your kids asking you, or your friends, like, what do you actually do? Can you explain it in one sentence?
That's what a profile is. It's an explanation of how you actually implement VCs. One sentence. Oof. Okay. Well, I should probably stop the recording because I think other people might start trickling in for the other meeting. But it's been great having you guys.